Hey kids, today we're going to work on adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators, but we're going to do a quick review first. If we look at these two fractions, 1/6 plus 2/6, we notice that the denominators are the same. So when we're finding our answer, all we need to do is add 1 plus 2 to get 3, and then we leave the 6 alone because the denominators are the same. Same thing over here when we're looking at 5/8 minus 1/8. The denominators are the same. So when we're subtracting, 5 minus 1 is 4, and then we leave the denominator the same because they're eighths. The only other thing that we would have to do is simplify these fractions because 3/6 is not in simplest form and 4/8 is not in simplest form. So we would have to make sure that these fractions are in simplest form, but we'll get into that when we're looking at how we practice. So let's draw our attention to number 1. I notice right away that the 3 and the 6 are not the same. So when I'm looking at the fraction 2/3 plus 1/6, I cannot begin to add because I cannot say 2 plus 1 is 3 and 6 plus 3 is 9 to get 3 9s. That is not how I am going to be able to solve for this problem. So that would not be the correct way for me to solve. So what I'm going to do instead, I am going to look again at my denominators. I have a denominator of 3 and a denominator of 6. And I'm going to find the multiples of those two denominators. So I'm going to come over here to the side. I'm going to write 3 and I'm going to write the 6. And I need to find the multiples of 3 and 6. So let's get started. The multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and 18. So I'm just doing the first 6 multiples. The multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, and 36. And so notice I'm counting by 3s, I'm counting by 6s. And what I want to find is the least common multiple. So I want to find the least. And I see that the 6s are the least common multiples. There are other ones. There's 12, there's 18, but I want to find the smallest one, the least common multiple, so that I can put that into my problem because I need to make 2/3 and 1/6 equivalent fractions before I can add them. So the next thing that I need to do is I'm going to rewrite this problem. So 2/3 is now going to be equivalent to what fraction? So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to look at my 2/3. I know that when I'm looking at the denominator 3, I come over here to this 3 and I notice that the 6 is going to be my new denominator. So when I find the least common multiple, that's going to help me find my new denominator. So that's what I'm looking for. My new denominator is 6. Now I must show how this 3 became a 6. And essentially what happened is that multiplication happened. 3 times 2 is 6. And so whatever I do to the bottom denominator, I need to do to the top, the numerator. So 2 times 2 will give me 4. So notice that this is now really 2 over 2. It's like it was 2/3, 2 over 2 makes a whole, and that is what I am multiplying by in order to get 4/6. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6. I need to do that again, but this time I need to do it with 1/6. So I'm making a new fraction. Remember, that's what I'm doing. I'm making a new fraction. So I need to look at my 6 over here, and I see that it really didn't do anything to the 6. It stayed the same. But what happened to that 1/6 is that it was times by 1 to leave it at 1/6. So now I have two new fractions, and they are both common denominators, and so I can now add them. So what used to be 2/3 and 1/6 has now become 4/6 and 1/6, so I can now add those together. And when I do that, when I add 4/6 plus 1/6, I'm going to get 5/6. And that is a way that I can add fractions or subtract them with unlike denominators. So I have to make the denominators the same first before I can do any type of operation. And that's the work that we're going to be practicing on. So let's look at doing another example. Okay, we have a half plus 2/4. Again, I notice right away denominators are different. So I'm going to come over here and get my multiples set up. So the 2 and the 4 came from this denominator 2 and this denominator 4. And I'm going to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 here. Then I'm going to do 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20. And remember, I want to find the least common multiple so that I can get a new denominator is what I'm looking for. When I find the least common multiple, I'm getting a new denominator. And so the least common will be the 4. That's the smallest. So now I'm going to rewrite this fraction. So it was 1/2, but how did that 1/2 now have a denominator of 4? Well, that happened when we think about multiplication. What times 2 makes 4? So that'd be 2 times 2. And because I multiplied by 2 on the bottom, I must also multiply by 2 on the top. And now my new fraction is going to be 2/4. And now notice that the one that I've already had, this 2/4, is essentially going to stay the same. However, just to realize what is happening here, this is being multiplied by 1, and so now we have 2/4. So now I have 2/4 plus 2/4, and that's going to equal 4/4. Now when we're talking about simplifying, making it in simplest form, we know that 4/4 is going to equal 1 whole. So my final answer for this problem would be 1 whole. This is going to take some practice. So if you are having trouble following along, go back and look at it as many times as you need to, because this skill does take a lot of practice. It's not something that you're going to look at once and be done with it and understand it. You have got to make sure that you are practicing. Let's try an example with subtracting. The process is still the same. We see the 3 and the 4. They're different. We cannot we cannot subtract the 3 and the 4. 2/3 minus 1/4. We cannot subtract those because they are unlike. So that means we need to take our denominator of 3 and our denominator of 4 and find the multiples. So it's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. It's 4, 8, 12, and 16. I'm looking for the least common multiple. The least is going to be, for this example, the 12s. The 12s are going to be the least. So those are what I'm going to use. So when I rewrite 2/3, I need to say, how did 2/3 have a new denominator of 12? So my new denominator is going to be 12. And the way that my new denominator became 12, when we're thinking about multiplication, what times 3 makes 12? That'll be 4. So whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So 2 times 4 would be 8. And so 8/12 becomes my new fraction. It's equivalent. 2/3 and 8/12 are equivalent. I need to do the same thing with 1/4. So I'm going to show 1/4 also has a denominator of 12. How is that? Well, what number times 4 gives me 12, so it's going to be times 3. And what I do to the bottom, I must do to the top, and that's going to be 3/12. So now that I have made these the same denominators, I can subtract them. And so I can say 8 minus 3 is 5, and then I have 12 because they are the same. And this one did not need to be put in simplest form because 5/12 is already simplified. And now I'm going to give you some to try on your own. Again, practice, practice, practice. You got to go back and look at the examples and follow along with an example that I've done so you'll be able to successfully do some on your own. And then in class tomorrow, we're going to elaborate a lot more on making sure that we can add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. This is just to get you started. Okay, so it's your turn to really try and practice, and remember to go back to the examples to see how you're using the least common multiple to help make the denominators the same before you add and subtract. And it's very important that you understand the least common multiple to find a common denominator. And in class, when we're working, we'll talk about some other strategies that we could use to also help with unlike denominators. But for this particular lesson, you really need to understand least common multiple and how you're using that to find common denominators. Work hard. See you in class. And make sure that you don't forget to go on Edmodo and say, Ms. Clemens, I have watched the video, and turn in your assignment. Put all of your work in your journal. Work hard. Again, see you in class tomorrow.